Malaysia Flight MH370 vanished without a trace, but it wasn't the first plane to disappear. In fact, there was a plane that disappeared and came back. Follow me down the rabbit hole about Santiago Flight 513. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about Santiago Flight 513. My dad suggested this episode, so thank you, Dad, for the suggestion. When he first suggested this, I was like, whoa, that's crazy. So I'm really excited to cover this because I don't know. There's so many what ifs. Like, is it true? Is it not true? I want to believe it. I don't know. It's actually funny because next week's episode was suggested by my mom. And so, but guys, I promise you they're not getting special treatment. They suggested an episode. I put it on the list, just like I put all of your guys' episodes on the list. They just are together typically when they suggest episodes. So they go back to back. So don't think that I'm giving anybody special treatment. My husband gives me suggestions all the time. I'm like, I don't have time to do your suggestion. So anyway, so flying is not as dangerous as driving, right? Like, we all know this. But when a flight crashes or goes missing, it does take along with it quite a lot of people, because in a car you have, if it's a van, potentially you have up to 15 people, or a bus, you could have a decent amount of people. But in a flight, you have 200, 300 people potentially. You have a lot of people that could fit on this flight. So when they go missing or they crash, a lot of people are dying. So it feels like a bigger issue. And also we're going in the air, which we are not meant to be in the air. But I guess are we meant to go 60 miles an hour down the road? I don't know. Either way, it doesn't matter. There's some crazy things that happen when people get into accidents, right? But since the beginning of flight, about 100-ish commercial and civilian aircraft have gone missing. So that feels crazier than crashes, because crashes you're okay, I can expect a plane can crash or a car can crash. But to go missing, and over 100 of them, that's a lot. It's a bit better now because we have satellite technology we didn't really have back in the day when we first started flying. But as we've seen with the Malaysia flight, it doesn't always help, because we had the satellite technology. We still don't know where the plane is. We have no idea where that plane went. So back in the 50s, there was a flight, the Santiago Airlines flight. So on September 4th, 1954, a flight operated by Santiago Airlines took off from Aachen, Germany, and they were going to Porto Alegre, Brazil. So it was going to be a 18-hour flight across the Atlantic. Flight 513 was a Lockheed Super Constellation. So it's a 4-engine aircraft that could hold somewhere between 47 and 106 passengers. These aircraft were manufactured in the late 40s, early 50s, and it was used commercially, but also by the U.S. Navy and the Air Force. And in fact, actually, when I read this, I thought it was really funny because the squadron that I was in had Super Constellations for a while. Obviously, well before I was in the squadron. But we are required to learn the history of our squadron. So I was like, hey, I'm pretty sure we had those. We flew those, and we did. Anyway, so this flight vanished while it was somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. We don't really know how far into its flight it was, or when it vanished. It just never landed in Brazil. So a large-scale search was conducted, but the flight was never found, obviously, because it vanished. So like the Malaysian flight, no debris was ever found either. So nothing from the flight was found, no signs of the aircraft, nothing. No people, no debris, nothing. At the time, authorities basically just decided that the plane must have crashed and then sunk, and obviously all the lives on board were lost. I find that a little hard to believe, because when an aircraft crashes, it like loses debris along the way. So you would think that you would find some sort of wreckage. But I guess they decided that all the parts of the aircraft, even the parts that like would have broken off, must have just like sunk, and they just were too late to, like, their search was just too late. I guess I don't know. I don't know how they justified all that. And just 2 years later, in 1956, Santiago Airlines went out of business. So that was the end. They were like, "Yep, I guess it just crashed and sunk," and that was basically the story. And everybody believed it because, like, what else? You don't have any proof of anything else. However, that was not the end of this aircraft or of this flight. Because on October 12th of 1989, a super constellation was seen circling the airport in Porto Alegre, Brazil. Yeah, yep. And this plane was not on the schedule to be there. Like, it was not supposed to be there. They were like, what the heck? So, as they would do, the airport officials tried to get in contact with the plane to, like, get them to land safely, find out who they are, what's going on. Nothing. Like, the plane was literally just, like, circling, and then it just landed. So, air traffic control could not get in contact with it, and they just decided, we're gonna land. But that's not how things work. You don't just get to, like, land at an airport. But this plane just did. They just landed. It was fine. But because of that, because, like, this is not normal, they sent officials out to the plane to find out, like, what the heck's going on, like, why did you just land like this? Why are we not in contact with you? Who are you? And also, super constellations were not popular planes in the late 80s. They were basically, like, completely obsolete at that point, right? So when they opened the doors, they were completely shocked by what they found. On board, they found 92 skeletons. This accounted for all the 88 passengers and the 4 crew members that were on board the Santiago flight when it took off from Germany. And everyone was sitting basically in the seat that, like, is assigned to them. Everyone's sitting exactly where they should be. In fact, the pilot was still in his seat holding onto the controls. The plane, when they approached this plane, it's still idling. So, like, the plane's not off and it just landed. But the pilot, the skeleton, is completely intact. He's in his seat. So then who landed the plane if this skeleton is in the seat, the pilot seat? And the plane's still on. It's not like somebody, like, jumped off and ran away, because they would have seen it. Like, officials instantly went up to the plane. I don't know. It landed appropriately. It didn't crash. Nothing crazy like that. So that, like, begs, where'd the flight been for 35 years? Like, everything on the plane perfectly intact, as if they literally took off from Germany and landed 18 hours later in Brazil, except everyone's a skeleton. So then people started, like, speculating, like, what the heck actually happened, right? So you have this Dr. Celso Atello, and he came forward with an explanation, which seemed to be, like, the most plausible explanation at the time, that the flight must have entered a time warp. He said also that there would be no other explanation for what happened to the flight, that this is it. He didn't have an explanation for how the plane landed and why the passengers and crew were all just skeletons, but that's his suggestion for what happened. And honestly, like, it really isn't much information out there about this flight, which is why it's so easy to not believe what happened. But this isn't the first flight to have disappeared. Obviously, it wasn't the last flight to have disappeared either, but it just seems really strange. And then on top of that, and I have a theory about this, is that they have all these shows and all these like, episodes, right? So you'll have, like, a X-Files or a Twilight Zone episode about planes that disappear and then come back. Or you have the show Manifest, where, like, literally a plane disappeared and came back 5 years later, but all the people on board were still alive and they hadn't lost any time, the people on board. It was just a normal flight for them. So you have all these things, and then people are like, you're confusing that Santiago flight with a show. That's not really what happened. It must have just disappeared and never came back. Then why? Like, why would somebody report this, that it happened? And why would it have landed? I have too many questions. I think that they made all these shows and episodes and different things to cover up the fact that a plane actually did disappear and then actually did come back later. Because who makes that up? I feel like every Twilight Zone, every little sci-fi episode or show is based on a little bit of truth. Like somebody had to think of this. Where did they come up with this, right?
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona. Menopause care made easy.
Did they come up with this because this flight came back? Anyway, I wanted to go into a couple other flights that had disappeared because there's just been so many of them, and it's really odd, like how many flights have completely disappeared without a trace. So to start, you have Amelia Earhart, and she, if you don't know who she was the first female pilot to fly solo over the Atlantic Ocean. So she had made her name in aviation. But on July 2nd of 1937, she disappeared without a trace. She was attempting to fly around the world, like be the first person to fly around the world. She did have a co-pilot with her, Fred Noonan, and they were flying a Lockheed Electra 10 Echo. They were about 21 days into their journey when they disappeared. And no trace of Earhart, Noonan, the plane, nothing was ever found. It was just like completely lost and gone. Then you have Air France Flight 072, which flew on August 1st of 1948, took off from Fort de France, heading for Port, I'm going to mess this up, Ednia in West Africa. That's probably not how you say that. So around midnight, the U.S. radio picked up a Mayday distress signal. So like obviously something was going wrong. This distress call placed the aircraft about 1,100 nautical miles off the northern coast of Cape Verde. And this is the last time anyone heard from the flight. The French, Portuguese, and U.S. governments all launched search efforts, and they didn't find any trace of the aircraft. It was completely gone. You have the Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501, which was flying... I don't know if it was flying from New York to Seattle or from Seattle to New York. It was doing a trans-national flight, going one of two directions. And this was in June 23rd of 1950. They were flying a DC-4 aircraft, which was carrying 58 people. At the time, so they were believed that the flight was about 3,500 feet above Lake Michigan when it lost contact with air traffic control. But the pilot had literally just requested to drop to 2,500 feet, which to me, this altitude seems really odd because by this time the plane, you're over Lake Michigan. The plane should have been much higher off the ground than 3,500 feet. And then asking to go lower seems like something must have been pretty off. I don't know if they got like the approval to go to the lower altitude. I'm assuming they probably did. But after that call to lower their altitude, the flight was basically never seen or heard from again. It just vanished. There were some witnesses that said they heard aircraft engines and then saw a huge flash of light, but the search engines turned up no the search efforts, turned up no fuselage, nothing. That's not true, not nothing. They did find small fragments of plane on the lake, like some upholstery, some body fragments, tiny pieces of debris, but it's nothing so significant. So it just vaporized in the air, and then there only a couple things were left on the surface of the lake. I don't know. It was very, very odd. Next is Skyways Avro York. So this is a military trooping flight that disappeared on February 1st, 1953. This flight had 39 people on board, 6 of which were crew members, and then 33 being military personnel and their families. It wasn't just military. And they were headed to Jamaica from London with a fuel stop in Azores. They had been giving positional, operational, meteorological reports. Wow, that was hard to say. Of the aircraft's location on 1 hour intervals. So they were pretty in contact this whole time. And then all of a sudden, their last known location was updated at 0530. And this location was updated and was immediately followed by an SOS distress message. So because of this distress message, they sent out search and rescue, search operations. And the only thing they ever found was a huge oil patch about 120 miles away from the aircraft's last known location. And this was found actually 2 days after the plane went missing, which I feel like is really odd. You think that if it's from the plane that's missing, it would happen pretty right away. But that's not how it happened. Then you have the Atlantic R6D TAC 1 flight, which had 50 members of the 307th Bombardment Wing of the U.S. Air Force, which went missing on October 10th, 1956, along with its 9 crew members aboard the Douglas DC-6 Bravo. They were headed for Azores from England, and the plane was last spotted at around 22:10, so 10 p.m.-ish, about 370 miles off the coast of England. So the U.S. Air Force members were on a 90-day temporary orders to the United Kingdom, which is why they were in England, which makes sense. And during the search efforts, they did find 4 wheels and a life raft floating in the ocean, but they never found any passengers or fuselage or anything else. They just found 4 wheels and a life raft. So I don't know if planes are sinking really fast. When I was in the Navy, they basically told me that we could stay near the plane for a long time if we went down in the water because it wouldn't sink very fast. That it would be okay, and somebody would see the plane before they would see the life rafts. So they told us to get into our life rafts and then just stay near the plane because the plane will sink very slowly, is what they told us. Now I'm starting to question maybe our plane was going to sink really quick. Also, I have doubts that we would have survived had we landed an emergency landing in the water. I basically chalked it up to if we had to crash land, I wasn't going to survive, period. So I'm glad that never happened. Next, we have the Garuda Indonesia Flight 542. So on February 3rd of 1961, this flight was on its way to Balikpapan. They took off around 22:35, so 10:35, with 26 people on board. The weird thing is, it was on the radar at cruising altitude when suddenly it just disappeared off the radar. Just poof, gone. So they got the search and rescue team up looking for the flight, but they never found any trace of the flight or passengers or anything. No distress signals ever received, nor was any last known location ever established. This plane literally just vanished off the face of the earth, kind of like the Malaysian flight. We have the Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. So on March 16th of 1962, Flight 739 disappeared. So it was also a super constellation, had 93 soldiers, 11 crew members, and 3 Vietnamese nationals on board, which is important because they were flying from Travis Air Force Base in California to Saigon, Vietnam, which is probably why, you got the Vietnamese nationals on board. The plane did stop to refuel in Guam, which everything was completely fine when they did that. Then they took off. They were going to continue on. When they were kind of over the Philippines when they disappeared, the search efforts covered 144,000 square miles. Like, this is a huge search effort. And like one of the largest search efforts ever performed in the Pacific Ocean. No wreckage or site of the flight was ever found. Kind of like the Malaysian flight. Again, just completely disappeared. The last one I'm going to just talk about really quick is the Pakistan International Airlines Flight 404. This flight took off on August 25th, 1989 and completely disappeared. It was a Fokker F-27 Friendship plane, and they were flying from Gilgit to Islamabad. I'm saying all these names so wrong. So basically, shortly after they took off is when they disappeared. There were 54 passengers on board the flight, and they were thought to have crashed basically into the Himalayan mountains. But no trace of the flight was ever found. They think that, like, the Himalayas are so rugged that if they did crash, they wouldn't have been found anyway. They did some search efforts, but nothing really could be found because of the mountains. I did an entire episode on the Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, so if you have not gone and listened to that, I highly suggest it. I'll link that in the show notes. My question is, like, where are all these planes disappearing to? I did cover some planes that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle, as well as some ships in the Bermuda Triangle episode, so if you want to listen to that, I'll also link that in the show notes, so you guys can go back and listen to those episodes. Like, it just is blowing my mind, because not all these flights were in the Bermuda Triangle. I really can't wrap my head around how Flight 513 disappeared and then came back and landed and then had only skeletons on board. Like, I don't get it. I can't. There is a YouTube video that I linked in my show notes, and they discuss like different places on our planet that have these, like, what they call vortexes. So a vortex is basically a time portal to a parallel universe. And they explain all this in the YouTube if you want to go watch it. The theory says that a vortex opens in a parallel world, which consists of like antimatter, and the thing that is being transferred is transported within a matter of seconds to the parallel world. So we see these places on our planet, like we see them all over the place, right? So we see like the Bermuda Triangle, the Devil's Sea Zone, the Michigan Triangle, which I hadn't heard of the Michigan Triangle before. So is that maybe what happened to the Flight 2501 that was flying super low and then asked to decrease their altitude? Then they just disappeared because they were flying over Lake Michigan. So, and that's part of the triangle. I hadn't heard of this triangle before. Either way, I know a lot of these flights that disappeared were like pretty early on in flight. Still, like 1950s was a popular time for flights to disappear. But that doesn't explain all the flights that have disappeared since then. I mean, without any trace of anything. There's some weird things going on in this world, and they like to cover it up. And I've actually brought this up in other episodes where I feel like they use sci-fi and like movies, TV shows to cover up the fact that weird things really are happening, because then they can reference, be like, you just watch too much TV. You pay attention too much to like sci-fi shows. Isn't there a Twilight Zone episode about that? You know? So then they're trying to gaslight us out of believing these things when clearly something weird is going on. They just don't want us to catch on, but we're smarter than that. So until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then.